Hey there, fellow sophisticated connoisseurs. Wow, spelled that correctly on the first shot. Go me. Hey, that's pretty impressive. Fucking French with their useless vowels and consonants that don't make any sounds. Just tacked on to look impressive. Oui, monsieur, madame. We must use this X in this word. Why? We are French, and we must make it as difficult as possible for the English pig dogs. That's why. Well, that went off the rails quickly. So, yeah, sophisticated connoisseurs we are, for we are cultured and refined. I'd ask about food of preference, but I'll leave that to consummate professionals of the topic, like Nick Ricada. Speaking of cultural refinement, I have another anime review to bring you all today. Now, this is an anime that I've attempted to watch multiple times in the past, and never got through the first season. Not sure why. I think I just got distracted by something shiny. However, this time, I actually made the effort to sit down and try to watch this through the first season, and what do you know? Not only did I manage to get completely through that first season, I got through the movie they made a few years later, and got through the second season, and am now on the third. I'm also looking forward to the fourth season, since that was officially announced. I'd wait till I was done with the third season to actually do this review, but I'm on a schedule that I do actually like to keep, and I feel like I've got enough material to give this one a fair review. The anime in question is colloquially known as DanMachi. However, since it's based on a light novel, we all know that light novels, by law, must have titles long enough to fill up their own novel. So, this one is called Donjon ni Dei o Motomeru no wa Mechigateru Doroka? Or, in English, is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon? After watching even the first few episodes of the anime, I feel like that title is a bit of a misnomer. The main character literally never tries to pick up anyone. Especially not in a dungeon, fantasy dungeon or otherwise.
Scream!
However, I do feel like the premise is a little involved, so I'm going to break it down the best I can. If I fuck up, my apologies. First off, this setting is a standard medieval European-style fantasy world, in an anime. Why do I have that qualifier? I'll get to that in a moment. The whole backstory behind this world, because it's rather important, is that thousands of years ago the gods decided to descend to the mortal plane, locking much of their power away in order to live amongst their human children. Children used figuratively here. Once there, they set up clans called familia around their chosen children, figuratively, which granted these mortals access to strength and power through an experience and leveling system, which they achieved by going into the massive dungeon complex in the center of the main city of Horario, simply called The Dungeon. That's just the backstory for context. The anime itself revolves around a young mortal by the name of Belle Crenel. Belle is the only member of the Hestia Familia. Yes, all the gods in this anime are based, often fairly loosely, upon real-world gods that were worshipped throughout history by different cultures across the globe. So you have Greco-Roman gods intermixing with Nordic gods, Indian gods, Ganeshas and Ned, Celtic gods, Persian gods, etc. Belle's one of those typical ultra-determined, good-hearted main characters you see in most anime. Standard main character, right? In the first episode, he nearly gets killed by a high-level monster and has to be saved by this high-level warrior, Ice Wallenstein, who just so happens to be a beautiful young woman. He is, of course, instantly smitten by her and determines that he's going to become strong as quickly as possible in order to meet her on equal footing. Ultimately, his actions begin to get him noticed by other characters, families, and powers that be, and this anime is about the adventures and misadventures that result from this. What do I think of this anime? I can honestly state without equivocation that I have thoroughly enjoyed it. As stated, I'm on the third season and looking forward to the fourth. It's not just another isekai with a mildly to massively overpowered protagonist. It's fairly standard for an anime, fantasy, fare, with swords and magic, monsters and elves and all that jazz. Again, I throw that qualifier in there for a reason. Anime, manga, light novels, basically Japanese media, seems to have this really strange relationship with the fantasy genre. Most everything will be standard fantasy fare, right? You'll have your standard fantasy weapons, inns, castles, fortifications, etc., and everything will be done semi-historically correct for the time period they're wishing to evoke. Semi-historic because most every fantasy plays fairly loosely with historical accuracy, let's be honest. The one thing I've noticed that the Japanese will do a lot, though, is play very, very loosely with accurate clothing. I'm not just talking fantasy-style armors and whatnot. I'm talking about clothing that is obviously anachronistic to the period the rest of the world and the observable level of technology evokes. Things like modern underwear, bikinis, or modern formal dress. Things that weren't common till the 20th century. There are other things too, but that's really the most common thing I've noticed in these types of stories. It's not so much a bitch per se, so much as it is a critical observation. Something where I see it the first time in a fantasy anime like this, and my first reaction is, whoa, why is this motherfucker wearing a tuxedo? It's really a common enough trope in Japanese entertainment that I'm just like, okay, Japanese fantasy world, I'll go with it. I generally work on the idea that it's probably just easier to do that than to try to research period-specific costumes for different situations. Like I said, not a bitch, but just something I've noticed and wanted to sort of comment on. But like I said, I've been thoroughly enjoying this anime. Bel Crenell is pretty much a standard anime protagonist. He's determined as all hell, he's kind-hearted, perhaps more than a little naive and idealistic. He has the general issues with women where he's completely clueless, of course. For me, personally, the real standout here is Bel's goddess, Hestia. Mythologically, Hestia was the Greco-Roman goddess of the hearth and domestic order from the home all the way to the state. Her role as a hearth goddess naturally extended her domain into a goddess of home and family as well. All in all, historically, she was a very important goddess. So important that her temple fires were the first lit upon founding of any new city, town, or village. The reason I state this is because it is in stark contrast to her overall divine status in the anime. In the anime, Hestia is a fairly low-ranked goddess whom the other gods look down on as lazy and a veritable mooch. Her and Loki, who in the anime is a gender bin, have this weird little rivalry which mainly consists of them sniping at each other over their various physical attributes. Loki commenting on Hestia's small stature and voluptuous attributes, with Hestia mocking Loki's noticeable lack of said attributes. Lolly Cowtits is tossed around fairly frequently, much to my delight because it's fairly apt and funny. Honestly though, the best part of this anime is the relationship between Bel and Hestia. As is clearly obvious, Hestia is very much in love with Bel. Not just love as a patron, nor as a quote-unquote mother figure, nor even a friend or older sister, straight up romantic love. And Bel is, of course, completely oblivious to this. No matter her overtures, he continues to treat her with the love and respect one would show a well-respected family member. However, Hestia's short temper and raging jealousy over any female attention toward Bel is what makes her character more thoroughly enjoyable, at least to me. There are many other characters in the anime, of course, all of them fairly well-rounded in their own ways. There's Ice Wallenstein, a well-respected and high-ranking hero, and a member of Loki's Familia. She at first comes across as a stoic warrior woman, but is ultimately shown to have a lot of loyalty and is a bit of a stereotypical blonde. Little ditzy. There is Lily, who's a support-type character for the heroes when they go dungeon delving. She's one of the most well-rounded characters outside of Bel and Hestia. I don't want to spoil anything for those who haven't watched this show, so I'll just state that she's a very good character. Lots of depth to her, at least in my opinion. There as well, a smith who initially joined Bel to get a certain skill for his job, but wound up staying on as his companion. He's also a pretty good character. Not quite as well developed as Lily, but good nonetheless. A few other companions join up as the show continues as well. Then there are the appearances of various other gods and heroes to sort of round out the cast. Really and truly, the characters are what makes this anime so good. In particular, the relationship at the center, which is that of Bel and Hestia. Without them, this would be just another cut-and-paste fantasy anime. Not much different than any of the multitude of other ones that have come out in the last decade or so. Which, I suppose, is ultimately true of any work of fiction. The characters drive the story. Which is why so very many projects here in the West ultimately fail. Lack of character. So obviously the characters are really what I love about this anime. That and the character designs and artwork, as usual. Although I still wonder what the actual fuck is up with Hestia's boob ribbon. Seriously, what is that? I digress. What didn't I like? Nothing really outside of standard anime tropes, like the main character being oblivious and probably overly innocent. However, it doesn't necessarily detract. There's also that anachronistic clothing thing I mentioned earlier. These are just small things that if I was forced to pick them out, I would. Ultimately, this was a fun anime. It's had me dying on any number of occasions throughout the 24 or so episodes that I've watched, plus a movie. The movie honestly annoyed me more than anything else, and it's easily skipped. No bearing on the overall narrative of the series that I've seen so far. But, the anime is a good solid watch, especially if you want to laugh. However, that's all I've got for this one, folks. This one is definitely running long. If you've watched DanMachi, tell me what you thought in the handy section below. While you're down there, I don't need a divine sponsorship, just someone to click those shiny buttons. I'll see you on Saturday for this week in pop culture. Lates.